So this is the final idea about the hagadah. 7 ideas for the 7 days before Pesach to help prime for the telling of the tale. As I mentioned in part 1, so much energy is expended and invested in the first part of the Seder. All those stylistic introductions about the 5 Rabbanim who gathered in Bnei Brak, and the 4 sons telling the story from very different vantage points, asking very different questions. The Manishtana, all sorts of activities meant to provoke, stimulate, surprise, engage, whether it's karpas, breaking matzos, all sorts of gimmicks to draw interest. And because of our enthusiasm and anticipation for the Seder, we tend to indulge and analyze each and every component, each and every element of this very, very long introduction. What's the gematria of karpas? Why do we not make a bracha? Why do we break the middle matzah? The 4 questions, the 4 sons, the 5 rabbis, and by the time we reach the actual tale, we're a bit winded, time is late, the food is burning, chatzos is looming, and we make a quick dash to Dayenu, pretty much skipping much of the heart and soul of the Seder. So the tale of the actual Exodus from Egypt is told by those 4 psukim in Parshas Kisavo, known as the Arami Oved Avi section, because they are 4 verses which, in very, very concise form, very, very compact form, capture the entire story. The first pasuk describes Yaakov's historical descent, recognizing the looming, foreboding exile, but yet allowing himself to be driven by Jewish history. The second pasuk describes the nefarious, wicked, slow, gradual, insidious treatment of the Egyptians, slowly but surely defaming the Jewish people, casting them as evil, vayareo osanu hamitzvim, vayanunu, and slowly turning the tide of public opinion towards genocide. The third pasuk describes this great moment where the Jews finally pray to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, where they don't pray in the classic sense, but they moan and they cry, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu hears their cries and their agony and interprets this as a form of tefillah. And the final part of Arami Oved Avi describes the actual Exodus. 5 elements of our redemption: Yad Chazaka, Zroa Netuya, Mara Gadol, Osos, and Mosim. Now the truth is, perhaps the most powerful of these 5, not in physical power, but just in terms of the strength of ideas and this incredible event of Yetzias Mitzrayim. There's so much that was occurring that night. Theologically, the Egyptians were being lessoned or tutored against paganism. Of course, the Jews were being liberated. The covenant of the Avos was being fulfilled. But on top of everything else, it was really the first time that God appeared to a community of human beings. The first time that God appeared to an individual was in the beginning of Parshas Vayera. Vayera lav Hashem ben Loni Mamre. Avram has just received circumcision. Before a Jew is circumcised, he can perform every mitzvah except for 3. He can't eat from a korban pesach, he cannot eat from truma, and he cannot enter the Beis HaMikdash to embrace the Shechina, because until he has bris milah, he isn't considered a tamim. He isn't considered complete. Bris milah completes a human being. And once he's tamim, then he can be hisalech lefanai. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu encourages Avram, hisalech lefanai, in order to walk in my presence, to be lefanai, hayei tamim. Then undergo this circumcision, perfect yourself, and then I will appear. And in fact, in the beginning of Vayera, the Rebbeinu Shalom appears. The first time HaKadosh Baruch Hu actually appeared, the first moment of Gilui Shechina in the history of mankind, because beforehand HaKadosh Baruch Hu had spoken to man, had promised, had warned, had formed a covenant, had punished, had appeared in a dream. There were points of encounter, but not the full-blown, the full exposure of Gilui Shechina. This was the first. And the second occurs in the end of Parshas Vayera, where Avram finds himself on Har Moriah. He's ascended the mountain. This time God doesn't come to him, he has to find God, but the same encounter and the same terminology, not Vayera, but Bahar Hashem Yera'eh. So this appearance, this rendezvous between God and man, first occurs in Parshas Vayera. Beforehand, speaking, dreams, punishing, covenants, promising, but never direct Gilui Shechina. What about the first Gilui Shechina to an entire people? Now, you would have expected all sorts of appropriate settings for the first Gilui Shechina, perhaps the Mishkan or Beis HaMikdash, perhaps Har Sinai, perhaps the Yam Suf, perhaps Eretz Yisrael, Yerushalayim, and yet the Haggadah reminds us, based on the pasuk in Parshas Kisavo, V'mar Gadol Zu Gilui Shechina, that the first time HaKadosh Baruch Hu ever descended into history and appeared to mankind was in the stinking, decaying, rotten cesspool that Egypt had become. And this is truly an amazing concept. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's glory, infinite, sweeping the universe, the entire cosmos, Malei Chol Haaretz Kivodo. The first time it should emerge in plain sight, whatever plain sight for human beings means, the first time it should emerge and reflect itself, reveal itself to man, is in a city that had become a field of corpses, a cemetery. The entire country had become infested with rotting, decaying bodies. That's the first time Hashem appears. Every corner in Egypt had a shrine to a different idol, to a different pagan ritual, to a different world of black magic. This was the least appropriate place a person could ever imagine HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Shechina first appearing. This is a momentous occasion. And yet here it is. Egypt. For one reason. There's only one reason HaKadosh Baruch Hu appears in Egypt. He could have punished the Egyptians. He could have sent agents. He could have demonstrated. But the personal involvement of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the descent into history, into the cesspool of Egypt, is an act not of theology, not of retribution, not of justice, not of liberty, but an act of love. Because tonight is not just a moment of liberty. Tonight, the great love affair of history between God and His people, between God and His chosen people, a people that marches through history with a mission, with a task, with a burden, with an honor, with a badge. And they're loved dearly by HaKadosh Baruch Hu for that tolerance, for that stamina, for that perseverance. And we love HaKadosh Baruch Hu in part and in reciprocation. And it's a difficult journey of Jewish history. In Shir HaShirim, the Jews are compared to a Yonah, to the doves, Einayich Yonim, Yonah si b'chag ve'asel, Pischli li'achlosi, Yonah si, Raya si, Tamasi. So often the Jews are compared to a dove, and Chazal say the most important attribute, the most important trait of a dove that captures the Jewish spirit throughout history is the loyalty of a dove. And the loyalty of the Jewish people throughout history to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is simply amazing. It's simply unparalleled. We've suffered, we've been discriminated, we've been expelled and burned and chased and genocided and gassed, and still, we've been treated as sheep for the slaughter, and still our love of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is unending. It's an incredible feat of Jewish history. That all begins tonight, the night of Pesach. Amar Rabbi Shimon, the Medrash says, Melamed chibasan shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The love HaKadosh Baruch Hu has for the Jewish people. Mitoch chibasan shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu la'am Yisrael. Nigla aleim b'makom tinofes, b'makom avodah zara, or b'makom mesim. Moshe, the Medrash, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't care whether there are dead bodies, shrines for pagans. Remember Moshe in Parshas Bo and in Vayera couldn't even pray in Egypt because it was so infested with black magic and sun gods and reptile gods and cattle gods. Again, it's hard for us to even imagine such a world. But such was the world the Jews lived in. Such was the world of Egypt, and such was the world that wasn't an appropriate setting for tefillah. And yet HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Melamed chibasan shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this is an act of love. When a person loves another human being, lahavdil, you don't care where you are. You could be in a fancy hotel, you could be in a slum. That person becomes your place, your setting, your world, your universe. HaKadosh Baruch Hu delivers that message to the Jewish people. Where you are, I want to be. Regardless of whether it's an appropriate place for HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Shechina, my Shechina is drawn irrevocably after the Jewish people. And tonight's the night when it all begins. Tonight's the first night of Gilui Shechina. Tonight's the first night of Jewish history. HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodashim, especially this year, 2009. What an incredible opportunity to begin the 207th cycle of the alignment of the earth and the sun, to make an Osei Maaseh Bereishis, to recognize the cycle of history, the immutability of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's world, the eternity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's wisdom. And then at night, the Hisham B'Lav Hoseinu, promise, the love, the faith, the romance of history. What an opportunity to recite Birchas Hachama, to follow it up with the night of Pesach. Chag Kasher v'Sameach.